Marketer of the Day, episode 672. Double your close rate CaseFuel, Google AdWords, cost per click, and intake consulting for lawyers with Roos.
This is Robert Plank, Marketer of the Day podcast. We are back with return guest Roos. And Jan used to have a company called Expert Engines, and you can hear all about how he helps local businesses, especially lawyers, with their AdWords pay-per-click at marketeroftheday.com/379. But Expert Engines has since rebranded into CaseFuel, and now they focus 100% on lawyers. And you might notice, if you pay attention to some of these guests and return guests, that their business evolves over time, and many times they'll stumble into these happy accidents and say, we started off and we were going to provide this app or this solution or do this thing, and we realized that there's a little 80-20 action happening where 80% of our business is serving this type of client or performing this service, so it's time to strip away and niche down and focus just on what's making money, and that's what they've done, and now they're CaseFuel, and now they are helping lawyers. But wait, before you shut down or skip to the next episode or close the app or delete, here's the thing, is that it's really helpful for me personally to listen to other people's problems and about other people's businesses. And if you've ever been in a mastermind or you've attended a live event, a conference with some kind of hot seat happening, then either you get this or you don't. And here's what I mean, is that when you go to either an event or a mastermind, there's usually the best format or the most common thing is what's called a hot seat, right? Where you have the leader of the event or the mastermind, and he's the answer person. And then you have someone who sits in the hot seat who says, I have a business that does this, I have this and this and that problem. And sometimes people in the audience or people on the panel can jump in and answer questions. The person on the hot seat says, here's my recent successes, here are my goals, here are my problems, here are my roadblocks, here are my questions, here's my plan, what do you think? And then that leader of the mastermind many times will jump in. But here's the big difference between the people that succeed and the people that don't, is the people that succeed in these mastermind environments, they have curiosity, right? And here's what I mean, is that when someone who's in a completely different situation or different niche or different agency is talking about their problems, well then a lot of, I would say most of the room, going back to 80-20, 80% of the room tunes out. They're not talking about me. They're not talking about my niche. Let me just open up the laptop or play on my phone or start doodling on the paper. But the 20% is still listening because there might be some helpful, interesting nuggets. So I say that, saying that you might not be a law firm, but there are still some really helpful, interesting marketing pieces of advice mentioned here. As far as phone closing, as far as knowing your numbers, as far as focusing. But you also might be a law firm who doesn't quite have their marketing dialed in or hasn't even paid attention to some of these phone call things. And this is where, in either situation, whether you are in the legal background community or you are not, still pay close attention to what Jan has to say, because there are always nuggets. And many times when I have an aha moment or I think of something innovative or something that no one in my niche or industry is doing, it's because I was being curious and I listened to someone who was in some other industry or niche or did something totally different and said, here's what I'm working on, here's my strategy, here's my mindset, here's where I'm stuck. And you never know, sometimes you get an aha moment just by hearing about how, maybe in Jan's case, they are helping lawyers he is differentiating, but they're helping the lawyers with their inbound sales. And what's really great about the way that Jan thinks is he's really analytical, and he knows how important it is to not make decisions based on emotion, to know your numbers, and also to know what your moving factors and your goals and what to look for and what your observations should be, so that way you know when things get better or worse and what happened. And I mean, a lot of people in their businesses, they don't have goals. And they don't have goals because they don't know what their numbers are, so they don't know what's working and what's not or what they should be shooting for. And if you know your numbers, if you even know like your rough numbers, then you know how much work is required and you know what the cost is. And I won't go too long on this, but what I mean by this is, for example, I know that when I have an email list, I know that 1% of my subscribers are going to unsubscribe every day, right? So if you have a list of 20,000 people, you're going to have 200 unsubscribes every day, but that's good. That means that you know how many new subscribers you need to get to refill the bucket, right? To get those new sales. I also know that if I send an email, I'm going to conservatively get 2% of the people on the list to click, right? And you see a lot of people who they focus on conversion rate or open rate or things like that. And I say, if you have that same list of 20,000 people and you send an email, if you get 400 clicks, that's good. And so that way you don't beat yourself up because you don't know what a good number is. And also you know how much work is required, right? So if you know that you send an email, you're going to get 400 clicks and you're looking to sell some new course or sell some new service, you say, well, I need to email at least 5 or 6 times this week to promote this. If you know that on your landing page that you're emailing to, if you know that it conservatively converts at 1%, then you know how many sales to expect. And then you know what your costs are going to be. And those costs could be time-based or money-based. But this is what Jan's bread and butter is knowing your numbers, knowing what that close rate is and these inbound phone calls. If someone calls a law firm and they have a problem or they want information, this is what he excels and exceeds at with CaseFuel. And I'll let you judge for yourself and listen to him and talk about CaseFuel. And at the end, he's going to promote a URL for you, and that is casefuel.com/MOTD. And he has a new audiobook out. He'll give you a free copy of that. And also he has a law firm growth podcast. And it's always good to get those URLs up front. That way you can have them in the background while you're listening, or just keep them in mind if you're walking or driving, because sometimes on a podcast, things move a mile a minute and you don't catch those web addresses. So it will be casefuel.com/MOTD, and his personal contact email is Jan, but his name is spelled Jan. So Jan at casefuel.com. That's CASEFUEL. And I'll let Jan take it away and tell you about how he helps with, we already discussed Google AdWords, but he's going to talk about how he helps with intake telephone consulting for lawyers. So Jan, take it away. Glad to be talking to you.
Hey, Marketer of the Day listeners. This is Jan Roos, and I'm following up on an awesome interview that I recorded with Robert back a couple of years, 2019. So the title of that podcast was Expert Engines Use AdWords Pay-Per-Click to Get More Leads into Your Local Business. And taking a quick listen of that, it's been really interesting to see how much things have changed. As far as AdWords go, it's more or less the same platform as it was back in 2017. It was mature then, it's still mature now. Maybe we've seen a little bit of an increase in the cost per click, maybe a little bit more competition, but that's more or less what to be expected. As far as personal things go, we're actually no longer Expert Engines. It was probably no surprise if you listen to the original podcast that we were pretty focused in lawyers. But if you go into expertengines.com, it's actually going to redirect towards our new brand, which is CaseFuel. So we're now 100% based on lawyers. I think it's always good to niche down, but basically we found some interesting stuff in the last 2 years, which has kind of really changed the business model away from being more or less a marketing agency. So, I've got some stuff that's going to be really directly applicable to lawyers, but kind of like the last episode, there's some takeaways for anyone who's running a local business or anyone who's working with local businesses as a whole. So if I had to boil everything down into one thing that we've learned in the last 2 years, it's really the importance of what happens after marketing. So in the same way that we used to differentiate based on other AdWords agencies by doing stuff like having analytics, call tracking, landing pages, that kind of stuff, we've actually gone beyond the people that are already doing that and actually focusing on helping out people after the lead comes in. And the way that we ended up doing this was kind of interesting, and it was informed by a lot of the stuff that we've been doing since then. So we've actually had the opportunity to work with literally hundreds of law firms in our 5 years of doing this kind of thing. And it's very interesting because we saw sort of a big difference in what the good firms were getting in terms of results and what the people that weren't getting in terms of results. Now, one of the things that was really, really dangerous about our business model, but very appealing at the same time to the people we worked with, was that we didn't have any sort of contracts. We weren't signing people up for 6 or 12 months. We were literally only held into the contract by our results, which I wouldn't take back from the world. I think it was a really good thing. We still do it. The challenge is we had a lot of people that weren't ending up getting results. But the thing that was really confusing is that the numbers, as far as the actual marketing, AdWords, lead gen, cost per lead, volume, all that stuff, all looked the same. So you could have a firm that was getting the exact same type of calls, volume of calls, cost of calls, that was staying with us for years and making tens, hundreds, a lot of many thousands of dollars. And then there are actually people who would do a trial with us for a month or two and say, I can't believe anyone's closing leads with this. This is crazy. We can't do this. So at first we kind of thought, yeah, maybe there's some markets that are tougher than others. Maybe it's not as clear cut as we see, but basically we ended up finding the answer to this totally accidentally. So, and the way we did this was basically we had a client that had hired us. He ended up also a couple months after we started with them, he hired somebody who is a specialist in intake consulting. So that's kind of specific to the legal niche. Intake is basically inbound sales. So whoever's picking up your phone, is it you the attorney? Is it somebody at your front desk? Blah blah blah. But that entire process of handling somebody that's coming into your law firm is known as intake. So basically, this intake expert was able to, we launched a new campaign in the bankruptcy law niche. And right out of the gate, the guy was able to close cases like the first couple days. And we're like, wow, maybe that's lucky. But it ended up keeping on happening. So this guy, and honestly, to this day, he's still getting some of the best numbers we've ever seen. We're talking about probably 1 in 3, 1 in 4 of the phone calls that ends up coming his way. He's actually signing into a case. So that was fantastic. And it was really validating because we're like, well, sometimes we'd actually literally had people that was one of those 1 or 2 month developments. That was the last time that we'd run a bankruptcy campaign. So we're like, well, obviously it's not the leads. And to keep going on that, we ended up doing some more testing. So we actually teamed up with that intake consultant working on some of the other people that he was working with. So what we ended up finding was that when we had a baseline of intake process, anything that we were throwing into the top ended up working. So we've done it in about a dozen states so far. And we actually recently started outreach to others, but we really haven't actually lost a client because every single time we're getting the marketing in, it's actually sticking. So kind of 2 different ways that you can look at this and apply it to your own business. If you're a local service business and if you've had issues with hiring marketing, doing marketing for yourself, whatever, or haven't been able to hit an ROI, this is a really big lever. And I think a big issue in the market as a whole is that people end up kind of overselling the importance of a marketing agency and underselling what's really important as far as sales, because it's really tricky. It's kind of tough. You wouldn't want to say, you don't want to say, hey, look, your baby's ugly, you can't close sales. And most of the time, if you're a business person, you're probably pretty entrepreneurial. Maybe you actually worked in a sales role at some point, hopefully. But no one's going to ever say I'm bad at sales either. Just like, it's not something that people really care to admit. But if this is something that might be a thought to you and you don't really know, we've got kind of some hard numbers that we actually work with. And then, basically when we have people that are coming into the firm, this is literally one of the first things that we ask in any sort of intake is, if we get 10 calls from somebody that's not a referral, not somebody that how many of those do you end up closing? So in the legal space, if people really have their numbers tight, and a lot of times people will lie on this to their own detriment, but basically, the average close rate for most of these firms is somewhere between 5 and 10%. So 1 out of 10 to 20 calls will end up turning into a case. Now, we're talking about the legal space where the cost per lead can get really, really high. Even for the more attractive practice areas, we're probably looking at $40 or $50 per lead. If you want to talk about stuff like personal injury, that can get up to $150, $200 per lead. So multiply that by 10 or 20, and it's really, really expensive to get a case. Now, when we have intake process in place, and this is numbers that we've had internally as well as doing audits on people who do keep big numbers, which tend to be the bigger firms, a really good gold standard for a close rate in that space would be about 20%. So if you think about the firm that's doing 5% versus the firm that's doing 20%, then we're literally talking about that the firm that has 20%, it costs 20, sorry, this is getting confusing. that firm will be getting 4 times as many cases, 4 times as much revenue into their checking account as the firm that has 5%. Now, the thing is, whether the marketing agency is going to tell you or not, that's what you're really judging them on. So, and a matter of fact, you could have a relatively cruddy marketing agency going into a really strong closing situation, and you'd actually do better than having the absolute top flight marketing agency with, an okay or bad closing or situation. But the problem is basically it's very, very tough to find natural closers. I mean, for the most part, when we ended up running, we kind of looked back and said, okay, we've got these firms that have been with us making tons of money. What do they look like? And a lot of the times it was the larger firms that had been along for a long time. And my theory behind this is basically, you're not going to start with, it's a learning curve like anything else. The larger firms just happen to have more experience closing people on the phone. So it's very rare to find that in the smaller or startup, lawyer or any sort of local business. So I guess sort of the takeaway, depending on where you're at on the side of the equation, is basically, sales might be more important than you think. So if you're in that situation where you are a local business, take a look at your numbers. Be honest with yourself. If you're not closing about 20%, look to see if there's ways that you can. If you happen to be an attorney, we actually ended up recording a free video course. So I'll get a link at the end of the episode so you can kind of find that. But basically, sort of best practices, scripts, that kind of thing. The reality is, I think any law firm, for the most part, unless they're hardcore closers, in which case, they probably don't need that much help. Most law firms are in a position to at least double their close rate, which is why we have the name of the course is Double Your Case Files. Other stuff that could be interesting is basically, I've actually published a book since then. So if you have any interest in AdWords, specifically for law, but it's actually a pretty good blueprint for local services in general, we can actually get you a free copy of that book on Audible. I'll also have that on that link. And I'll just drop that link right now. So it's going to be casefuel.com/MOTD, marketer of the day. MOTD is the URL, and it stands for marketer of the day. So you can get a free copy of the audiobook, free course on sales for attorneys. If you happen to be a law firm, we've actually also started a podcast, a law firm growth podcast. We'll have a link there. And then the last thing is that, if you're just in a local business or you want to reach out, you can always feel free to reach out to me at Jan, Jan, at casefuel.com. Always happy to talk to like-minded people. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So if there's one takeaway, just consider what the difference might be between the responsibilities of your marketing or the people you're working with, and your intake team or the people you're working with for there. And if you get one to work, if you get the intake to work, you can basically throw anything in the top, and then you'll be making money regardless. So I hope that helps, and thanks for listening.
That wraps it up for Jan. Thank you very much, Jan. And once again, those web addresses are casefuel.com/MOTD and JAN at casefuel.com, casefuel.com/MOTD, and Jan at casefuel.com. And listening to his interview along with you, or his clip along with you, I'm reminded of how important it is for us to know what that customer acquisition cost is. Even if it's a rough, almost educated guess of a number, know what your customer acquisition cost is, because this way you'll be less afraid to run ads, especially, right? Or hire people to bring in more sales. If you know that it costs you, or if you know that if you make $10 for someone to walk in the door of your local business, let's say, then, and you know how many new people you get per month, then you know what your advertising budget could be. And you can tell that, well, if I know that I'm spending $8 to get someone in the door and they're making $10, then I don't have to be as afraid of running ads. And if I know if I'm spending $20 to acquire a new customer and I'm only making $10, then I can also go the other way and think about maybe that method of advertising, or the ad we're running, or the budget we have, or the agency that's doing that for us, or whatever, something needs to change there. And it's better to know your numbers than to be ignorant. But if you know what this rough number is, right? If you're a doctor, dentist, lawyer, doesn't matter who you are, but I mean, lawyers especially, since that's what we're focusing on. If you know how much, when someone walks in your door, how much money you're making off that, or when the phone rings, how much money, if you can run some of those calculations, I think that you'll feel a lot better and you'll be a lot more logical. And then if you also follow how that number changes from employee to employee on your team, from week to week, month to month, then you'll know if the things that you're doing are on the right track and working or not working. So anyway, make sure to go to casefuel.com/MOTD or email jan@casefuel.com. And like we said in the beginning, I would highly recommend that you adopt a curious mindset. And even if you're not a law firm or have no interest in law firms, maybe listen in a little bit, because you never know if you're going to get an aha or if you're going to get some interesting marketing advice that can apply to you. Or maybe even you know a law firm that might need Jan's services. Now you can be the expert and help them out. I mean, think about this. What if you were curious naturally about different subjects and you just liked learning new things from podcasts or from audiobooks? And if you happen to know that this guy Jan and CaseFuel can help out lawyers, what if you happen to know some law firm that was struggling or needed some improvements and you recommended them and got them together? That could be some bonus brownie points for you, right? That could be a way where you could do someone a favor and maybe they might do a favor for you. Anyway, go to casefuel.com/MOTD. You'll be glad you did. Thanks, Jan. We'll see you next time. Bye now. Please take a second to rate and subscribe to Marketer of the Day in the iTunes Store. It's free. marketeroftheday.com/iTunes.